drum collectors can now have for these instruments, because that's going to be lost, and it's such a good thing that you took the time to make that happen, to research that, and it's for the benefit of the whole vintage drum community. Now, speaking of the prominent figures in the early days of drum manufacturing, I think we should switch over to William Ludwig II. I believe you had a lot of association there.
Oh yeah, he was he was a great guy, and I in the tribute there was a tribute in Modern Drummer, and I told the story that I will tell you in a sec. But I said in there, I can't say Bill Ludwig Jr. or Bill Ludwig II or Bill Ludwig II without smiling. I can't. He just was a great guy, and I saw him when I was a teenager. Back then I was one of those Beatle era kids who was smitten with the Ludwig Drum Company,
Sure.
and I would practically memorize the catalogs and be very excited when each new one came out. And, you could tell which pictures were the same as they'd been the issue before and which pictures were different. And, of course, no matter what happened, the prices were always higher.
Of course, and you being into the minutia and being the kind of person that remembers, you'd know all that stuff in the catalogs, right?
Sure. And back in those days, catalogs were always at dealers. So you would go to, the music store that handled Ludwig drums, and there'd be a stack of Ludwig catalogs. And then you go to the next music store that had Slingerland, and the next one that had Gretsch, and
That's
back
where
in
I
those
got
days,
mine.
most stores only had one brand, and so I would just collect everybody's catalogs and take them home.
Yeah, that's thanks to my mom. She saved those. I'd come home from music lessons. There'd be my Rogers 64 or whatever, and I thank you for her for saving those, because they're so important to me now. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and you would compare. The Ludwig catalog would be 100 pages, and the Gretsch catalog would be 60 pages. You go, what is this? What is this? But anyway, so I when I had my store, Bill Ludwig would travel the country, and he would give a talk about the history of percussion. He had slides and sound effects, and he would talk about, back in vaudeville and radio and stuff, and it was always very interesting.
I've heard about that show that he did. Yeah, later he was doing that. I remember. I think even B3 now, I believe, does a little bit of that. Yeah. He has continued that on several occasions, I believe.
Bill was just a real hoot. So Indianapolis and Chicago are 3 hours apart. So he, Maggie, his wife, who predeceased him, got in the car, the Cadillac, and drove to Indianapolis, and this was probably 89 or 90.
Uh-huh.
And they stayed at a hotel, and I went to pick them up. So I go to the hotel and, call and say I'm in the lobby. She comes out first, and he comes out. He goes something like, "Harry, nice to meet you." And I said, "Mr. Ludwig, we've been friends for 25 years. And he looked at me like, a dog can't quite figure out what the master is telling him. He's tilting his head, and ear goes up, and that sort of thing. And I laughed. And said, "Well, I've known you for 25 years. You just haven't known me." Everybody knew him. I mean, they knew his picture. They knew his. Of course. They knew his name.
The famous picture with Ringo and the gold-plated drum. I mean, come on.
And inside the catalog.
Yes.
Sure. So he'd come to Indianapolis. I'd go to Chicago. We'd have dinner. We'd have lunch. He was just a wonderful guy, and he was a raconteur. He had story after story after story.
Fantastic.
His life and his battles, and his father was a real his father wanted to be at the factory like every waking hour, and Bill would say, "I've had enough. I need to go." And so he had a cabin cruiser, and he would go out on the cabin cruiser so his father couldn't find him. But he said to me one day, he goes, "You know how many hours are in a weekend?" And I said, "How many hours? How many hours, Mr. Ludwig?" He goes, 72. Well, now, if you think about it, Jim, there's 48 hours in a weekend. Somehow, he made it to 72. Anyway, he's a pretty funny guy, and he gave me the flag that he flew on his cabin cruiser.
Yes, and we have a picture of it right here.
He gave it to me, and I cherished it. And when he passed away, I called Bill III and said, I got some great memories of that flag, and I'll take a picture of it, but I'm going to give it back to you because you really need to have this."
Wow.
So I gave it to him Bill Ludwig. I'm smiling right now. Bill Ludwig, the second, was just a wonderful guy.
Isn't that something you can't talk about?
Wonderful guy.
You have to smile just when you're talking about him. Isn't that great?
I do. I'm smiling. Yep.
Say, let's talk about some drums here.
Okay.
I noticed now Harry was kind enough to send us some photos of things in his collection or things that he's had over the years, but we want to talk about one here that is of the gold triumphal Ludwig reissue. I believe these were made by Adrian Kirschler. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I really have always loved Ludwig. I just have. And so when they announced that drum, I sent a note to Jim Catalano, who's another terrific guy.
Yep.
Jim has been kind of the face and the spirit of Ludwig for a long time.
I did a bit of an interview with him at the Chicago Drum Show this year, and he, like you, couldn't say enough about the Chief.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah, he was with him a whole bunch.
Yes.
Well, when they announced the drum, and I thought, and they were only going to do 100 of them, so we knew they were going to be numbered from 1909 to 2008. I wrote Jim and said, "Hey, I'd like to get a number here without getting one just for fluke, because I'd like to get a number I can remember." And he goes, "Well, what would you like?" And I said, "Well, the year I started playing was 1964. And he laughed and said, "64 is already gone." Well, now that's the year the Beatles came out, too.
Of course,
so I can understand why somebody wanted 1964.
Oh, yeah.
So he said, "Well, what's your next choice?" And I said, "Well, I can always remember I was born in 1950, so I have Triumphal 1950.
Amazing. Now, this that you're looking at right now, folks, is, once again, I said this is a reissue of the Ludwig Gold Triumphals. And when were they originally made?
I'm sorry, how many were made?
I'm saying, when were they originally put out, these Gold Triumphals? What year?
Oh, the first ones?
The originals.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. Ludwig went to 8 lugs about 1925, 20. I would say 27, 28, 29. Certainly right before the Depression. Because if you look at Ludwig stayed at 6 tube lugs for quite a while when Leedy, for example, went to 8. And so I think you have to get to about 1926, 27 before you get into the 8 lugs or 10, which came a little later, but also what Ludwig called the fancy finishes. Now, the first Triumphal I ever saw was the William S. Hart drum. William S. Hart was a silent movie actor, was the first big cowboy star in the United States.
Yeah.
And he married a much younger woman, and they had a baby, and then they got divorced. And so in the Ludwig boardroom at the plant in Damon Avenue in Chicago, the Ludwig family had pedals and snare drums that were collected, and one of them was a Triumphal, was a engraved gold snare drum. It was a 4x14, and it was 5x14. It was just absolutely beautiful. And so I ended up buying that drum later from Bill II.
And is that the one I'm looking at right now? The picture that you sent me?
Could have been. Certainly could have been. I mean, I sent you some pictures of drums I have and drums I had.
Yes.
But that drum was absolutely beautiful. I ended up buying 3 from Bill. I kept one, which is the DFS Black Beauty.
Okay. Now, with the Gold Triumphals, if I understand, didn't Mike Corrado at one time own 5 of the 7 known to exist?
Mike Corrado, isn't he an interesting guy?
As far as collecting goes,
he must own 15,000 snare drums. Now, I get emails from him all the time. You go, and you see these too.
Okay,
the
now for those
one in
of
my
you,
collection, and you go, my God, he's added 15 drums.
Another one. He sends us, for those out there that you don't know, Mike Corrado, I'm going to say he's the leading snare drum collector, but for you new guys that don't know his name, I mean, I don't know how you could not know his name, but Mike started collecting, and within the first 2 years, I believe Not So Modern Drummer magazine did a little spread on him. He already had an astounding collection just from the 2 years he was collecting. But somehow he managed to amass 5 of the 7 known gold triumphals, and that's this drum that we have up on the screen right now. Harry, at one time, you owned one, or this is one that you owned, Harry?
I did own it, and we're talking about the William S. Hart drum. Yeah.
Okay, that's the one.
I own that, and I sold it to Mike. And the thing about Mike is, he lives in Northern California, and I think if he would just sell his drums, they could get California out of debt.
and the thing about Mike also, if you're on his list, guys, now he has a list of collectors, and a lot of them are high profile collectors, and I'm fortunate enough to be on there. So now I get these pictures of his latest acquisitions that he's worked on, and he sets them up so nicely. If you go to Mike's page on the Collector's Showcase of VintageDrumstalk.com, you'll see all these drums that Mike, these articles and pictures that Mike sends out to me. And Harry, I think you're on his list also, but he does them so nicely, and he's really a top collector. But it's amazing.
Yeah,
Mike is really something.
He not only has a passion, he's got a small army of craftsmen who are able to help bring back things by fabricating parts or polishing. Certainly, he knows, he's down to the point where he can tell you about which, polishing cloth and which thing he uses.
He has a lot of techniques.
Yeah, I mean, he's just, I admire Mike, and one of the things I admire about Mike is that he, to some degree, stands heads and shoulders above the rest of us in saving things to keep them from being painted black and stripped for parts, and used for target practice, turned into tables, all the things that people have done with old drums.
Right. He also, now speaking of some of his arsenal of people, I mean, one of them is Adrian Kirchler, a very famous name in the drum community. You new guys, if you don't know who he is, he's, I believe, over in Italy. He is the one who did the reissues of the gold triumphals, and we hope to speak with him one day here. He's already agreed to do that. We just have to solve a few transcontinental problems here with our connections. But anyways, there are a lot of guys out there like that. Now, Harry, I ask everybody that I talk to, some of their restoration techniques. I don't know if you're more of a historian or if you get into restoring drums and have any techniques or any tips to share. Yes, no, maybe so?
Well, I am not what I would consider a restorer. I would consider myself maybe a repairer, if that needs to be done. But I tend to look, as I look back, I tend to look for really good examples of things to start off with. So while I appreciate what Mike does, and I guess I've done to some degree where I fabricated or whatever that I ever bought was really pretty good. I don't trust it looks too good, because if this was a drum, it should have been played. Looks show them, for the most part, to me, there's some with it. I mean, it's been worked on. I want something to have been played, and you can tell it's been played, but it was respected by any number of people that had it. My viewpoint, we're all temporary owners, and so we don't do any harm. I would leave something alone before I would restore it, unless it was functionally sound, but it really looked bad. Now, that, in complimenting Mike Corrado, an awful lot of the stuff he has is choice. And there might be just some little something, I don't want to say minor, because Mike spends a lot of money to make stuff look good, but I'm just saying that something he can look at and he knows he can improve upon it. That's what he does. I don't restore. I either like it as is, or I won't